Conor McGregor was once the king of combat sports, the welfare kid from Dublin who became a two-division UFC champion, a global icon, and one of the richest athletes alive. But in 2025, his story looks nothing like the fairy tale it once was. Scandals, arrests, humiliating losses, and shocking injuries have turned the notorious into a shadow of the man who once ruled the cage. How did the fighter who seemed unstoppable fall so far, so fast? In this video, we trace McGregor's entire rise and downfall in order, exposing every step that led to his tragic collapse. To understand the tragedy of Conor McGregor, you first have to understand the unlikely rise. Born in Crumlin, Dublin, on July 14, 1988, McGregor grew up in a working-class family where opportunity was scarce. His father drove taxis, his mother worked tirelessly to keep the household afloat, and Conor was an energetic, often scrappy kid who got into fights more often than he stayed out of them. At 12, his parents pushed him toward boxing at the Crumlin Boxing Club as a way to channel his aggression. It didn't just sharpen his fists, it gave him identity. But fighting wasn't yet a career path. Through his teenage years, McGregor tried the ordinary route, apprenticing as a plumber, laboring long hours for little pay. Yet while he was elbow-deep in pipes, his mind was elsewhere, imagining himself in arenas, trading shots under bright lights. By his late teens, he knew the life of a tradesman wasn't for him. He quit the job and took a risk few would ever dare, committing to fighting full-time, with no backup plan. At one point, he survived on Ireland's welfare system, €188 a week, while training twice a day, eating whatever he could afford, and telling anyone who'd listen that he was destined for greatness. His journey brought him to John Kavanagh's Straight Blast Gym in Dublin, where he learned Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Taekwondo, and eventually rounded himself into a true mixed martial artist. While most thought his goals were delusional, McGregor saw something different. He spoke with certainty about becoming a UFC champion, long before anyone outside Ireland knew his name. "I don't just knock them out," he once said, "I pick the round." In Cage Warriors, Europe's premier MMA organization, he made good on his word. His sharp left hand, slick movement, and ferocious self-belief carried him to both the featherweight and lightweight titles, making him the first European to hold two belts simultaneously. His entrances were already theatrical, his interviews brimming with charisma and bravado. He wasn't just winning, he was performing. Word spread quickly, and UFC President Dana White himself flew to Dublin to see the hype firsthand. He came back to America telling reporters he had just witnessed something special. By 2013, the UFC signed him. The kid from Crumlin, once written off as a dreamer living off handouts, was now entering the biggest stage in the sport. For McGregor, it wasn't just about the opportunity. It was about destiny. His rise was just beginning, but the seeds of his eventual downfall, his obsession with fame, money, and myth-building, were already in the soil, waiting to grow. Conor McGregor's UFC debut came in April 2013 against Marcus Brimage. It lasted just 67 seconds. McGregor walked into the cage grinning, strutting, already acting like the biggest star in the room. When the fight started, his precision was undeniable. Slick head movement, sharp counters, and a left uppercut that sent Brimage crashing to the canvas. The knockout was brutal, the post-fight interview electric, and instantly, fans around the world began asking, "Who is this guy?" From that moment, his rise was meteoric. He dispatched Max Holloway, then a young prospect, and brutally finished Dustin Poirier with his trademark left hand in just under 2 minutes. After each fight, his confidence grew louder, sharper, more theatrical. He began predicting knockouts with eerie accuracy, delivering iconic lines at every press conference. After defeating Diego Brando in Dublin in 2014, he screamed into the mic, "We're not here to take part, we're here to take over." The line echoed through the arena and across the sport. The UFC saw their star and poured gasoline on the fire. McGregor was fast-tracked to a title shot against long-reigning featherweight king Jose Aldo. The build-up was pure chaos. McGregor taunted Aldo relentlessly, stealing his belt at press conferences, hurling insults, and invading his personal space. The mind games worked. When the two finally met at UFC 194 in December 2015, McGregor needed just 13 seconds. A single left hand ended Aldo's decade-long reign. In one punch, McGregor became a global superstar. But he wasn't done. He called for bigger fights, bigger stages. In November 2016, at Madison Square Garden, he dismantled Eddie Alvarez to win the lightweight title. In that moment, McGregor became the first fighter in UFC history to hold two belts simultaneously. His strut around the cage, holding both titles, cemented him as the face of the sport. Yet even in these highest moments, cracks were forming. Training partners whispered about shorter camps, fewer sparring sessions, and McGregor's growing obsession with wealth and fame. While his talent and timing carried him through fights, the hunger that once fueled his rise was already shifting. The humble kid who survived on welfare was now a global celebrity draped in mink coats, carrying himself like a king. The rise was breathtaking, historic, unprecedented. But as history often shows, the higher the climb, the harder the fall. And Conor McGregor's fall was already looming on the horizon. By 2017, Conor McGregor wasn't just the UFC's biggest star. He was one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet. Movie stars, rappers, and politicians wanted to be seen with him. He was the talk of late-night shows, magazine covers, and mainstream sports media. And when whispers began of a possible crossover boxing match with undefeated legend Floyd Mayweather, most laughed it off as impossible. But Conor didn't laugh. He insisted it would happen, talked about it at press conferences, tweeted about it endlessly, and, against all odds, the fantasy became reality. The press tour for McGregor versus Mayweather was unlike anything combat sports had ever seen. They traveled from Los Angeles to Toronto, New York, and London, holding wild press conferences in front of sold-out arenas. McGregor showed up in mink coats and three-piece suits, mocking Mayweather's age, height, and financial troubles. At one point, he wore a pinstriped suit with the words "F.U." woven into the fabric. Mayweather responded with stacks of cash and reminders of his 49-0 record. The spectacle was part boxing hype, part theater, part cultural phenomenon. When the fight finally happened in Las Vegas on August 26, 2017, it shattered pay-per-view records. McGregor started strong, showing surprising composure in the ring. For the first few rounds, he even landed clean punches on Mayweather, giving fans the illusion of a possible upset. But as the fight wore on, the difference in experience became clear. Mayweather, a defensive genius, let McGregor tire himself out, then poured on punches until the referee stopped it in the 10th round. The loss didn't matter. McGregor walked away with an estimated $100 million payday. Life-changing money, even for someone already rich. He became Ireland's first sports billionaire in terms of earnings and parlayed that fame into more ventures. He launched his proper number, 12 Irish whiskey brand, which exploded commercially. He bought luxury cars, yachts, and mansions. He flew private jets around the world, partied with celebrities, and shared every moment of excess with fans on social media. But this was the turning point. The hunger that once drove him, the obsession with training, the endless hours in the gym, the visualization of greatness, was replaced with champagne bottles and designer suits. McGregor still talked like the hungry kid from Crumlin, but the fighter who lived in the gym was fading. His body began changing too, adding bulk without the same sharpness. Sparring footage grew rare, replaced by Instagram clips of late nights and lavish meals. Critics began to ask the question, did McGregor care about fighting anymore? Or had he already transitioned from fighter to mogul? The Mayweather payday didn't just make him rich. It planted the seed of complacency. And that complacency would become the enemy he couldn't outfight. By early 2018, the cracks in Conor McGregor's empire were no longer whispers. They were loud, public, and violent. The flashpoint came in April at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. Khabib Nurmagomedov, the undefeated Dagestani wrestler, had confronted McGregor's teammate, Artem Lobov, earlier that week, slapping him during a hotel altercation. Word traveled back to McGregor, who was in Ireland at the time. Furious, he chartered a private jet with a group of friends and flew to New York to confront Khabib. What happened next became one of the most infamous moments in UFC history. McGregor and his crew stormed the loading dock of the Barclays Center, where a bus carrying Khabib and other UFC fighters was parked. Cameras rolled as McGregor picked up a metal dolly and hurled it through a bus window. Glass shattered, injuring fighters inside, including Michael Chiesa and Ray Borg, forcing their fights to be canceled that weekend. The chaos was captured on video and instantly went viral. McGregor was arrested and charged with multiple counts of assault and criminal mischief. Though he eventually avoided jail time with a plea deal, the damage was done. What was once seen as confidence now looked like recklessness. The line between showmanship and criminal behavior had been crossed, and the world saw it happen in real time. The bus attack was more than just a scandal. It revealed something darker. Conor was no longer in control of his image. His ego and temper were running the show. UFC President Dana White, usually protective of McGregor, called it the most disgusting thing that's ever happened in UFC history. Fans debated whether McGregor had lost touch with reality, letting fame and money turn him into a caricature of himself. For McGregor, the incident became both a stain and a setup. It set the stage for his eventual fight with Khabib, but it also exposed the growing chaos in his personal life. He wasn't just fighting opponents anymore, he was fighting lawsuits, police reports, and public opinion. In hindsight, the Brooklyn bus attack marked the first major crack in McGregor's empire. It showed the world that the fighter who once rose from nothing was now spiraling under the weight of everything he had gained. And for many, it was the moment they stopped asking if McGregor would fall, and started asking when. October 6, 2018. The date that many argue marked the beginning of the end for Conor McGregor. After the chaos of the Brooklyn bus attack, the UFC had no choice but to set up the fight that the world demanded. McGregor versus Khabib Nurmagomedov for the lightweight championship. The build-up was unlike anything the sport had seen. Press conferences turned venomous. McGregor crossed lines he had never crossed before. He mocked Khabib's religion, his culture, his father, and even offered alcohol to the devout Muslim fighter. What had started as promotion turned personal. It was ugly, toxic, and uncomfortable to watch. Fans were divided. Some saw McGregor as a master of psychological warfare, repeating the blueprint he had used to unravel Jose Aldo. Others saw desperation, a man clinging to the spotlight by attacking not just his opponent's fighting skills, but his entire identity. Either way, UFC 229 became the most anticipated card in the sport's history. But when the cage door closed, all the talk evaporated. Khabib dominated from the opening bell. He smothered McGregor with relentless grappling, dragging him to the canvas again and again. In the second round, Khabib dropped him with a clean overhand right, a wrestler outstriking a striker. By the fourth round, McGregor was exhausted, battered, and trapped. Khabib cinched a neck crank and forced McGregor to tap. The notorious had been broken, humbled, and humiliated in front of millions. The chaos didn't end there. After the submission, Khabib leaped over the cage to attack McGregor's cornerman, while members of Khabib's team stormed the cage to brawl with McGregor. The event devolved into a near riot. Dana White refused to award Khabib the belt in the Octagon out of fear of fan violence. What should have been McGregor's chance at redemption turned into one of the darkest nights in UFC history. The loss itself was devastating. McGregor had been exposed technically and mentally. The aura of invincibility that had carried him through his rise was gone. Fans who once believed in his precision and bravado now saw a man outclassed. Analysts questioned if McGregor even belonged in the lightweight division, or if his success was a perfect storm of timing, luck, and charisma. The fallout was brutal. McGregor was suspended for 6 months for his role in the post-fight brawl. Khabib received a longer ban. But for McGregor, the damage wasn't the suspension, it was the humiliation. For the first time, the world wasn't laughing with him. They were laughing at him. And perhaps the saddest part? That night, the myth of Conor McGregor cracked. He had made a career out of breaking men with words and punches. But against Khabib, none of it mattered. He walked out of UFC 229, not as the face of the sport, but as a man humbled, beaten, and on the edge of a downfall no one could stop. After UFC 229, McGregor promised fans he would return stronger. He tweeted cryptic lines like, "It's only business," and vowed to rebuild. But instead of redemption inside the Octagon, what followed was a string of arrests, scandals, and disturbing headlines that began to define his life more than fighting ever could. In April 2019, a video surfaced from a Dublin pub showing McGregor striking an elderly man. The reason? The man had refused to drink McGregor's proper number 12 whiskey. The footage was shocking. The once beloved Irish hero was now punching an old man for not taking a free drink. Public opinion turned sharply. Even longtime fans admitted it was indefensible. McGregor eventually settled the case, but the damage to his image was permanent. The controversies didn't stop there. Later that same year, McGregor was accused of assault in Miami after smashing a fan's phone. He was arrested, photographed in handcuffs, and released on bail. Then, in 2020, he was detained in Corsica on suspicion of attempted sexual assault and indecent exposure. Although no charges stuck, the whispers grew louder. Old allegations from Ireland resurfaced. Journalists dug into police investigations. While nothing was confirmed, the sheer volume of accusations painted a disturbing picture. Meanwhile, his social media presence became erratic. Some days he posted motivational messages about discipline and family. Other days he ranted incoherently, threatened rivals, or bragged about violence. Fans noticed he looked different too, bloated, red-faced, heavier than his fighting prime. Rumors swirled about drinking, drugs, and erratic behavior. Sponsors started to back away quietly. The UFC, once protective of its golden goose, began to distance itself during his lowest controversies. Even Dana White, once his biggest supporter, admitted in interviews, "Conor's got to get his act together." The Irish press, which had once treated him like a national hero, began to turn on him as well, publishing damning stories and opinion pieces that asked whether McGregor had become a disgrace to his homeland. For many, this was the true downfall, not the losses inside the cage, but the losses outside of it. McGregor wasn't just another fighter anymore. He was a cautionary tale. The plumber's apprentice who became a king had now become a criminal headline, and each arrest, each video, each allegation chipped away at the empire he had built. By the end of 2020, McGregor wasn't known as the UFC's first two-division champion. He was known as the fighter who couldn't stay out of trouble. The tragic irony: the man who once inspired millions by escaping poverty was now trapped in a different kind of prison, one of his own making. After years of chaos outside the cage, Conor McGregor tried to redirect the narrative back to fighting. In January 2020, he returned at UFC 246 to face Donald "Cowboy" Cerrone. The fight lasted just 40 seconds. McGregor dismantled Cerrone with shoulders in the clinch, a head kick, and a barrage of punches. Fans roared. Analysts declared that the king is back. For a moment, it looked like McGregor had rediscovered the sharpness, the hunger, the brilliance that made him a star. But the illusion didn't last. When McGregor fought Dustin Poirier in a rematch at UFC 257 in January 2021, reality came crashing down. Poirier, who McGregor had once knocked out in under 2 minutes, approached with precision. He chopped McGregor's lead leg with calf kicks until the former champion could barely stand. Then, in round 2, Poirier landed a crushing combination that sent McGregor collapsing to the canvas. For the first time in his career, McGregor was knocked out cold in MMA. The myth of invincibility was gone. McGregor, embarrassed but determined, demanded a trilogy fight. The UFC obliged, booking Poirier versus McGregor 3 for July 2021 at UFC 264. The build-up was ugly. McGregor returned to dark trash talk, making personal threats against Poirier's wife, issuing bizarre social media posts, and leaning on theatrics to mask the doubts surrounding him. The fight itself, however, was brutal, not because of Poirier's strikes, but because of McGregor's own body betraying him. In the first round, Poirier dominated on the ground, landing heavy shots. As the seconds ticked down, McGregor stepped back to plant his weight, and his left leg snapped in half. His tibia shattered, leaving him crumpled on the canvas, screaming in pain. The arena gasped in horror. The fight was stopped. Poirier was awarded the TKO victory. McGregor was stretchered out of the octagon, but even then, he grabbed the mic and screamed, "This is not over!" But everyone watching knew it was. The sight of McGregor broken and immobile was more than an injury. It was a metaphor. His career, once defined by meteoric rise and shocking victories, had now become a spectacle of collapse. Fans debated if he would ever return. Some hoped he'd retire with dignity. Others knew his pride wouldn't allow him to walk away quietly. The leg break marked more than the end of a fight. It marked the symbolic breaking point of McGregor's career. The king was not just dethroned, he was shattered, humiliated, and left to pick up pieces that seemed impossible to repair. In the aftermath of the leg break, Conor McGregor vanished from fighting, but his presence online became louder, stranger, and more erratic than ever before. Months of rehabilitation left him bulked up, swollen with muscle, but slower, heavier, and unrecognizable compared to the sharp featherweight who once danced around opponents. Training clips were scarce, and when they surfaced, fans criticized his form, his timing, and his demeanor. "He looks finished," they wrote. But the bigger concern wasn't his physical state, it was his behavior. McGregor began posting bizarre videos on social media. slurred late-night rants, incoherent insults toward rivals, threats that bordered on delusional. At times, he would talk about being a billionaire athlete destined for greatness. Other times, he would appear disheveled, angry, and unhinged. Clips of him partying at clubs, drinking heavily, and stumbling through crowds went viral. The fighter who once carried himself like a king now looked like a man spiraling in plain view. Meanwhile, the legal troubles continued. He faced lawsuits over bar altercations, accusations of assaults, and lingering whispers of sexual misconduct investigations. Although many cases were settled or dismissed, the sheer volume of allegations painted a damning picture. McGregor was no longer seen as a rogue star pushing boundaries. He was viewed as a liability, a cautionary tale of fame gone unchecked. Even the UFC began to distance itself. Dana White, once McGregor's biggest defender, grew visibly frustrated when asked about him. Sponsors quietly pulled away. The aura of invincibility that once made McGregor untouchable in business was gone. Now, he was toxic. The Irish media, which had once celebrated him as a national hero, turned on him as well. Headlines shifted from pride to shame. Opinion columns asked whether McGregor had disgraced the very country that once adored him. The contrast was haunting. Parades of fans had once filled Dublin streets chanting his name. Now, those same streets whispered about his downfall with disappointment. And through it all, McGregor himself remained silent on the most important question. What was left? Would he fight again? Would he walk away? Would he seek redemption? The silence was deafening. And perhaps most haunting of all, it wasn't the silence of discipline. It was the silence of a man who seemed lost, detached, and without direction. By 2022, McGregor wasn't the sport's king. He wasn't even its villain. He had become a ghost. And that silence, heavy, erratic, tragic, was a warning that the worst chapter of his story might still be unwritten.